This is a podcast from the Fitzwilliam Museum, Cambridge.
I'm Timothy Potts, the director of the Fitzwilliam Museum, and welcome to From the Land of the Golden Fleece, Tomb Treasures from Ancient Georgia. We're very pleased to have this spectacular exhibition at the Fitzwilliam Museum. It is the first to be shown in this country on the culture of ancient Georgia, and it focuses on the material from the most spectacular archaeological site in the country, the site of Vani. Ancient Georgia at the time of the Greeks and Romans, which is the subject of this exhibition, shows us a very interesting combination of outside influences from the classical world, but also a very important and rich indigenous culture, which has its roots in Caucasus going back through the millennia before the period of the 5th through 1st centuries BC. To the Greeks, ancient Georgia was known as Colchis, most famous today as the place to which Jason led the Argonauts in search of the Golden Fleece. This is the story that most schoolchildren know, and probably perhaps the only thing they know about ancient Georgia. And it reflects what was, though, an historical reality, and that was the extreme importance of gold and gold working to the economy and to the culture of ancient Georgia. Indeed, the Golden Fleece may itself have been a way of capturing small particles of gold in the rivers in which gold could be found in ancient Georgia, so it may not be an entirely mythical object. Chronologically, the period that this exhibition covers is from the 5th and 6th centuries BC through to the 1st century BC, when the site of Vani was destroyed. During this period, it lies on the periphery of the major empires of the day, the great Achaemenid Persian Empire to the south and the land of the Greeks, Greece itself in the Aegean Islands, somewhat to the west. To the north lay the vast steppe lands in which the Scythians and other nomadic peoples inhabited, and all of these cultures have left something of a mark on the Georgians, who absorbed influences in their art and culture from the worlds around them. The site of Vani was excavated initially from the late 19th century, but the major period of scientific excavation has been from the 1940s onwards. And these excavations have uncovered a range of sanctuaries. Clearly, Vani was a major cultic center. Some installations which particularly seem to be concerned with the production of wine and the worship of Dionysus, the Greek god of wine. And as well as these cult centers, most famously, it's been the site where have been discovered a series of elite burials with presumably the elite members of Vani society laid to rest with extraordinary amounts of gold jewellery and other tomb offerings, vessels of silver, bronze, gold, and so on, dating from the 5th century, the 4th century, and the 3rd century BC. We know from the ancient Greek and Roman authors that Colchis was a rich center of gold production and metalworking, and it's been very interesting to see this absolutely confirmed by the excavations, particularly at Vani from this period. The exhibition is one that will be enjoyed, I think, not only for the spectacular gold work that you see, but also because it tells this story of how a culture which we really don't know very much of from the ancient texts has come to life through the archaeological world in an extraordinarily vivid way, and allows us to see also how these objects seem to have functioned within ancient Colchian society, the rituals that related particularly to wine. And it's something we see very much in the culture of Georgia still today, where wine plays a very major part. And we see the Colchians interacting and absorbing from the Greeks some of their mythology, some of their iconography, but also very consciously retaining a sense of their own artistic tradition. Well, we're now in the gallery, and ahead of us is one of the most spectacular objects in the whole exhibition, this life-size sculpture of a male, probably an athlete of some kind. Probably the first thing you notice about it is that it is so thoroughly classical, so Greek in style. This does reflect the period of Vani's history in the 3rd, 2nd and 1st centuries BC, when much of the material culture at the site comes from Greece, both imports of ceramics, bronzes, sculptures and other things, and local imitations. This object, although it is so purely Greek in style, was probably actually made in Colchis and may even have been made in Vani. We know that from the way in which it was cast. Although the style is of the high classical period of the 5th century BC, the period of the Parthenon and other great monuments of the age of Pericles. This was probably one of those imitations or adaptations of a 5th century work which was made a few centuries later. It was broken up during the sack of Vani around 50 BC and was found in this very damaged condition without its head and arms and the lower legs. But what has survived is of such extraordinary quality that it really is a testament to the quality of the bronze workers and the sculptors working in Colchis at this period. Interestingly, the excavators also found at Vani evidence of a foundry with many fragments of damaged or broken up sculptures of bronze which were being probably recast or reworked or repaired. So there was a very active metalworking industry in the city and in this region, not only in the precious metals, silver and gold, but also in bronze work. The next object we're going to look at is this figurine with gold jewellery attachments. And it's striking how different this is in style from the torso that we just talked about. This is very much more stylized. It's totally unclassical in form. There's no central naturalism to it. It's essentially a stick figure. And this reflects the fact that it derives very much from the local Georgian tradition of metalwork and of art generally, which goes back some centuries and indeed millennia into the 2nd and 3rd millennium BC, and involves a much more stylized approach to the representation both of human figures and animals and the natural world generally. It was found buried in a small pit just outside one of the numerous sanctuaries in Vani, in this case dating to the 3rd century BC. It's not absolutely sure what these figures represent. About 6 of them were found. They're all buried in pits, as it were, replicating human burials. Sometimes they're covered with terracotta tiles, as this one was, as if they're being protected in the same way that a tomb covering would have protected the bodies in real burials. Some have suggested that these may be priests. They have their hands slightly forward often, as if offering or appealing to a god. They're often buried face down, as if they're perhaps in some way approaching or appealing to a chthonic, an underworld deity. But because we don't have texts from this period which discuss in any way the local culture or religion, this is really quite speculative. Interestingly, they adorn them with gold jewellery, so they're represented very much wearing the same sorts of apparel that the wealthy elite of Vani themselves were buried with in the lavish burials of this same period. Next we're going to look at a head, a spectacular and beautiful, quite dramatic bronze head, which probably comes from a large cauldron, maybe a wine cauldron in fact. It shows a head of the Greek god Pan. He has his mouth open, his eyes wide, in a rather expressive, perhaps ecstatic state, which suits his sort of bestial character in Greek mythology. And Pan is one of the figures that often accompanies the god Dionysus, the god of wine. And this is very appropriate for Vani because this was a site and this was in a culture in ancient Georgia in which wine played a very major role, certainly as part of their ritual as well as in their everyday life. And an installation has been found at Vani which seems to have been devoted to viticulture, the production of wine, and indeed, in some sense, the worship of the gods and the figures associated with it, Dionysus, Pan, and others. So this vessel from which this applique figure, this head of Pan, derives, was probably one of the pieces of equipment used in the rituals associated with the worship of Dionysus. The style of the piece is, as I said, very dramatic, and the quality is really quite outstanding. The modelling and the expressiveness of the face, the detailing of the hair, the features, and the vine wreath around him are all beautifully done. From the style, it's probably a work made in Asia Minor, in Turkey, where there were many major centres of the production of fine works of bronze like this. So it was probably an import into Vani. A number of silver vessels, some gold work and much bronze work in this installation associated with Dionysus, has come from many other parts of the Mediterranean. So it was a very cosmopolitan society at this period, and we're talking about the late 2nd century BC for this work. So it was a rich culture, one with all these connections throughout the Eastern Mediterranean, and in this case producing an object that is one of the great masterpieces of this period of ancient art. We see the importance of wine and viticulture reflected in many interesting ways. One of them is that you start having people in the Hellenistic period being buried in pithoi, the large storage jars in which wine was transported and stored. And people in the period of the 4th, 3rd century are occasionally buried in these vessels. Together with the head of Pan, a number of other appliques were found, one of a satyr, one of the half-horse, half-man figures who also accompanied Dionysus, others of a Maenad, the female equivalent, and Ariadne. And these were all the figures who were standardly in the troupe of Dionysus, and they were probably also all affixed to the same spectacular vessel, which would originally have been really a quite marvellous and extraordinarily rich object. It's the style of Greek art that is often compared to the Baroque period in European art, and you can see why. The expressiveness, both literally of the faces, but also more so the style, the elaboration of the hair, the flowing windswept drapery that you get on figures of this period, is strikingly reminiscent, or in a sense prefigures, if you like, the true Baroque period of the 17th century in Europe. We're now looking at material from grave number 11 at Vani. This was one of the very richest graves discovered at the site of Vani in the excavations that have been really intensely undertaken since the 1940s. This grave was excavated in 1969, and it seems to be the grave of an important and certainly wealthy woman who was buried along with 3 of her servants and a horse. She was, as in most of these burials, very richly adorned in gold jewellery and decorations to her garments. Among the most extraordinary of the jewellery that she wore was this gold necklace with the beads, as it were, in the form of turtles. Each of the turtles is exquisitely crafted in a form of decoration we call granulation, since it's made up of patterns of little granules of gold. And this was a feature of jewellery not only in Colchis and the Greek world, but also in the West. The Etruscans in Italy, the Phoenicians in the Levant and elsewhere also use this technique in much of their jewellery. And it does give a very lavish, a very intricate, a very fine quality to the best of the jewellery like this. This individual wore not only this necklace with turtles, but others decorated with maze-like elements, with images of birds, ram's heads, and various other elements. The next object is this extraordinary hair ornament from grave 24, which is again one of the very richest that were excavated in Vani, in this case as recently as 2004. This burial had 5 people in it, the principal occupant and 4 servants, and a horse, and it was one of the richest, particularly in the gold work that was found there. And this is, of all the gold work, the most interesting and important piece. It's a clip of some kind, probably used in the hair, but it's the style that's so interesting. Although the tomb had lots of imported pottery, metalwork, glass, even a Babylonian seal, objects imported from all over the ancient world at this time, the gold work remains very much in the local Colchian tradition. And you see that expressed best of all in this work. The main face of the object has this extraordinary image of a stag with 3 deers around it, and then across the top of the clip 2 lions and a series of birds. Now the style of the representation of these animals is absolutely local, Caucasian, Colchian, Georgian if you like. So it turns its back entirely on the Greek tradition of naturalistic representation, and if anything it has much more affiliation to the Scythian art of the steppe lands to the north. And indeed you see images rather like this on bronze axes of earlier periods in Georgia. So it's interesting that in the richest and most lavish of their tomb objects, the gold work, they retain the local tradition, whereas in other aspects of the material culture, the pottery, the vessels they drink from, and other things, they're much more inclined to import works from the Achaemenid Persian Empire or from Greek cities. But it's the gold work that they're famous for, and which they clearly like to continue to produce in their own artistic tradition. Well, I hope this has given you some taste of what's in this extraordinary exhibition. It really is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to see material which has never been to this country before and probably won't again. Apart from the glitz and glamour and spectacle of this extraordinary jewellery, it is also an incredible insight into an ancient culture which has not really been very well known or studied in this part of the world. And I do hope you will have heard and seen enough to tempt you to come and see the exhibition itself at the Fitzwilliam. Thank you.